If you're talking about it, I'll be talking about it. Dennis Prager here. Join me this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live from Lake County Jail this morning. So in addition to my normal security detail, we have law enforcement from Lake County around us.
Yeah, I'm feeling very safe this morning. This is great.
And we're pleased to be joined now by our friend Mark Curran, who is the Lake County Sheriff. Mark, thanks for joining us and hosting us.
It's awesome to have you all here. Amy, I have not really met. She's 6 feet tall.
I know this.
She's got awesome skin. She's really a nice looking lady.
See?
So you have that's not bad waking up to, Dan.
Now
Sorry,
you
Dan,
you have to compliment me.
Yeah, what are some of his attributes?
Dan is one of the brightest individuals in this industry, if not right at the very top. So
that's not a substitute for that get out of jail free card.
You got that beard going.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
looking a little rough.
Yeah, I was trying to get a new look.
I thought, so your name, Mark, has become, when you think of the greats in Waukegan specifically, where we're broadcasting from, you think Ray Bradbury.
Indeed.
You think Jack Benny.
Right.
You think Mark Curran.
Well, thank you.
A great entertainer and
exactly.
And law enforcement professional.
Yeah, I'd like to have a street named after myself, I suppose.
Is that what this is all about, Mark? It's just getting the street name. That's why you're doing everything.
You know what? Quite frankly, I brought in my humidor, and it's
I did know.
And I offer Dan whatever he wants, ride home or what have you. For me,
the cigar will be sufficient.
Yeah, I get to carry a gun, but I don't really aspire to have a street. I like having a cocktail and a cigar and being in oblivion.
Perfect. A cocktail, cigar, and some gunplay.
And by oblivion, I didn't mean hammered.
What could go wrong? No, we know.
Yeah.
So how did your law enforcement career begin?
Okay, so
you were a fascinating man.
Yeah, thanks. So I went to law school, worked for less than a year at Continental Bank downtown, and decided to go to law school, and went to IIT Kent. And I wanted to, I was always gravitating towards prosecution, what have you, so I worked at 26 and Cal as an intern. I worked at Lake County State's Attorney's Office as an intern. I had offers from both, went to Lake County, and then I was a prosecutor for 8 years in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. Jim Ryan made me an offer to go to the Attorney General's Office, helped start up the Sexually Violent Person Bureau. Then I was chief of gang crimes and trials. And then I was going to run for state representative. I was a Democrat. My state representative was Ed Sullivan. He was pro-choice Republican. I thought that'd be cool, We'll see if I can get some of these conservatives to cross over, vote for me, and I'll be a state rep. And the Democrats weren't going to support me because of that one issue. And
welcome to the party.
Exactly. So they came back to me and said, hey, how about the candidates that they had been seeking for sheriff kind of fell through. They asked me if I'd be interested in running for sheriff, and I did. I wound up having a primary against a guy who had been in this office for 30 years, beat him. Then I beat Gary Del Rey, who had been the sheriff for 10 years, and now I'm running for my fourth term.
And so, so you've been here for 15 years as the sheriff?
11.
Oh, yeah, you're running for your fourth term. I'm sorry, not in their fourth term. So 11 years. So give us, because 11 years kind of thinking about the trajectory of Illinois, thinking about the trajectory of the suburbs. What's happened? What have you seen over that decade in Lake County in terms of quality of life, safety of communities, existing challenges?
Yeah, I think that, I took over an office that, and I'm not trying to disparage or what have you, but we've professionalized it, essentially. It used to be where, everybody's who's a precinct committee man, they could get their kid hired, or whoever was a relative. That was really the way in the door. And we've brought, good to great model corporate standards into the office. But as far as the county goes, it's been fairly consistent. There's been growth, but I always say Lake County is probably the most accurate microcosm of the country as a whole. You go down to Highland Park, and you have a lot of wealthy liberals, if you will, kind of like San Francisco, what have you. Mm-hmm. You go out west, and it really looks like red states, Alabama, Georgia, what have you. You got kind of the upper crust along, Lake Forest, where you'd find in maybe Republican establishment leading states. So it's and then we have the lakefront where we have a lot of public housing and we have some serious problems. So the model of Lake County stayed pretty consistent, but it is a wild county.
What are the law enforcement challenges that are the most pressing in the moment? We see in some of the nearer-in suburbs of Chicago a spike in carjackings. There's been a lot of discussion about the opioid crisis in the suburbs. What's Lake County dealing with?
Right. So the opioid crisis is everywhere, and we're dealing with that as much as anyone is. It's amazing that they get into these schools, and when I say they, essentially all major narcotics are run by street gangs. That may not be necessarily a gang member that's in the school that's distributing it to his classmates, but that person has contact with a street gang. And they give it away initially just to get them to use it, knowing that essentially anybody that uses it a couple times is going to be hooked and will not be able to overcome that craving. And then you have a customer for life. So opioids sometimes start with injuries, in the Oxycontin, what have you, and gravitate towards heroin, which is cheaper and more powerful. But big problem everywhere in the country. As far as street violence, I think that Lake County, we do things a lot better. I heard you talking earlier about Cook County and what have you. There's evil in the world, and we're not afraid to call it. And we're not afraid to say, hey, you know what, you're a member of a street gang. Sorry, buddy, we are coming after you. We are watching you, and we're not making any apologies for trying to put you away. So very, very different culture up here. Political correctness is not, at that level where we can't be honest.
What are your rules if you arrest somebody who committed a violent crime who is here illegally? What's the protocol?
Yeah, let me say this much. It has always been the same. Essentially, if somebody, let's go back more than 25, 30 years, and police officers will tell you that if they stopped somebody and they were undocumented, they'd call, at that time it was INS, and they'd come pick them up and they'd be gone. Those days were so far gone I can't even tell you. So nobody is really interested in the fact that somebody, that arrested on a minor offense is here illegally. Didn't matter whether it was Bush or Obama or President Trump. They're only interested in once they're arrested, incarcerated, and then the gravity of the offense. So that's what they have limited resources, and so that's what makes their decision as to who's to be deported and who's not. But we cooperate 100% fully. I know you'll interview Sergeant Corbett later, and he'll tell you that ICE, for a period there, they were in our jail every single day. Cook County, far different. They don't allow them to come into the jail. So I've talked to ICE agents. They say that when a defendant is released from Cook County, then he goes into the neighborhood, and they have to go try to find him there because they won't even tell him that that person's being released. So we don't play those games. My whole thing is that we don't have the resources to be ICE agents, number one. Number two, I'm a big proponent of community policing, and that's really not the role of local police. And I'm not unique in that. I mean, the Illinois Chiefs of Police Association has the exact same response. Most sheriffs do. I don't know any sheriffs that really weigh in against that locally, at least.
Going back to street gangs and drugs, there is, growing in popularity the idea of legalizing marijuana for recreational use. California has done it. There's talk about doing it in Illinois. From a law enforcement perspective, what's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was okay with decriminalization of marijuana, in smaller amounts. I had no problems with that. And, once again, from a resource perspective, number one. Secondly, from the perspective that is that really something that we want to be criminalizing? I don't think so. I think, in all honesty, I smoked marijuana when I was young, and I inhaled and all the rest of that.
No,
And yeah,
you
can you believe that? I went to college, but it's not.
I'm around a bad element. I know. I have not.
Dan
Right.
has never even tried a cigarette.
Wow, but he gets
But he likes to smoke cigars.
So that's why I have. That's what I smoke is now is a cigar, and a cigar buzz is as good as it gets.
Well,
There you go.
Mark grew up into a gentleman. I was a gentleman from a young age.
I
That's all.
smoked a cigar once
Yeah.
But nobody told me not to inhale. I ended up in the emergency room in San Diego.
Yeah.
So I have not
Really?
touched a cigar since.
So you
Stop
needed
trying to
a
be
little
one of us.
milder.
Just knock it off.
Yeah.
Just stop.
So you see, yeah, I mean, Demi Moore, they're all on the cover of
Yeah.
Cigar
Oh,
Aficionado.
yeah. They know what they're
Intolerable.
doing, though. Somebody coached them.
Yeah, right. They're holding a
Right.
cigar.
So
for a
marijuana,
picture.
the problem is, and I've got 3 boys, and I would tell them that it is bad. It's so bad. It kills brain cells. It's horrible for you. It's horrible long term. I'm not a proponent of it. And, getting beyond that, we have a real hard time quantifying it now. So somebody's under the influence of marijuana, we don't know when, they last smoked it, so, what have you. I've dealt with the sheriffs in Colorado and been in long discussions with them as to how it's working out. It's not working out. The roads are much less safe, so it's a really bad idea. And
That's interesting. The Colorado
yeah.
experience. You have real world laboratories to assess the results.
Right, exactly.
Now, how did you, when you came in as Lake County Sheriff, how did you deal with the loss of the number of Chicago Bears who were deputies at large for
Yeah.
the Lake County Sheriff's Police? How did you replace, like, say, Roland Harper in the force?
So I was telling Dan that the sheriff who was back in the 80s, Mickey Babcox, he essentially deputized.
The entire
Right, the Bears.
85 Bears.
Yeah.
Right. Fridge Perry had a badge, and Walter Payton had a badge. What that means is really they were, the sheriff has the right to deputize. Before the Illinois Law Enforcement Training Standards came along and said that, you can't
Wet
be
blanket.
Well, what does it mean to be
God.
deputized? So if you're deputized,
So
what kind of
I
powers
mean-
do you have?
I'll tell you, Amy, this is a true story. These are true stories.
You could have had Matt Suey leading you into a crack house rather than you having to do it
Right,
yourself.
Exactly. They
That's
have
the way you
arrest.
do
They have
it.
arrest powers.
Really?
So
Okay, what does it mean?
so there was one of the sheriff's big contributors out west that would go into the bar and he'd carry his gun out in a holster. I'm not kidding you. This is Lake County, 1980s. And
Cook County
essentially he'd have a few pops, and then one time he wound up firing it as a warning shot, kind of into the corner of the room, and we got called out, and then they tried to take back some of the badges. But when we had some correctional officers who were on trial a while back, and part of their defense was that the record keeping in Lake County at that time was so bad that you can't prove anything, and they went through all the Bears that had badges and all the other people and what have you, and then
Was it the whole offensive line, everybody?
Randy Whitmore, who's and Roger Whitmore, they're big tow operators up in Zion and Waukegan, and they were telling me that their brother Rick Whitmore, when he was a detective in the office, that Walter Payton and Roland Harper would basically hang out at his desk all day.
That's awesome.
In the off season, yeah.
Because who wants to be home with the wife?
That would be
Yeah.
a great cop buddy movie. Walter Payton, Michael Jordan lived in Highland Park. Walter Payton and Michael Jordan, like a cop buddy movie.
Yeah, you've had some pretty famous people here.
Yeah.
We have George Ryan was in our
Jail.
Yeah, recent. Denny Hastert was in our
Jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, it's great litany of Republican politicians who
Right.
passed through the jail.
Right.
I was
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about
Exactly.
sports athletes, but okay.
Yeah.
He is Mark Curran. He's the Lake County Sheriff. He's hosting us today as we broadcast from the Lake County Jail. Mark, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Do you know what they do to cops in jail? Hey, man, when you were a cop, did they let you use the siren?
Yeah, it's part of the job.
That's so cool. Hey, when you were a cop, when you were going to a crime scene, did you go chung chung like Law and Order?
No, that would be very unprofessional.
Oh, for sure. Oh, hey, by the way,
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
I'm Lou Dow.